So now that we've learned a little bit about how to access DOM elements, let's talk about how we can change DOM elements. Using JavaScript to read information about the nodes on our page is interesting, but what we really want to be able to do is change and create elements within the DOM. The first thing that we're going to need to do is we're going to need to get the element. You need that variable to be a handle on the element. We know that we've got elements, and we also have attributes and text nodes, but it's the element that comes first. Attribute nodes and text nodes belong to the elements. So if you're writing HTML, you just don't write an attribute by itself. It's the attribute of an element. You first create the element. So that's what comes first. Step 2, once we have the element, then we can alter it. You'll need to figure out what it is that you want to change about the element. So if you were doing it manually in the text editor, what would you want to do? You need to pick an attribute and then change it. Or do you need to add a new attribute? We could do things like change a link inside a heading, or we could add a bunch of new elements inside of a div or inside of a list. We can do all sorts of different things, but let's concentrate on changing elements right now. One of the simplest changes to make is to change an attribute of an element. So once we've gotten the element, JavaScript actually has two methods that we can use directly to work with its attributes. There's getAttribute and there's setAttribute. GetAttribute is very simple. We just need to say what attribute. You pass this on as a string inside of double quotes. It's the name of the attribute. Align, title, class, source. SetAttribute works very similarly, but we'll need a little bit more information. We pass in a value, so we call the setAttribute method. We pass it the value in quotes, always as a string. If the attribute doesn't currently exist, then it'll be created. Let's look at how we can do this. Here's our page that we've been working on, and it just has some content on the page. So we're just going to go ahead and alter an attribute about something on the page so we can change the way the page is going to work. Here in my editor, I don't have any JavaScript currently, but I do have the script tag, so I'm ready to start scripting to my page. So we're going to go ahead and just grab this div called wrapper, which actually wraps around all of the content on the page. So we'll just make a global change to some items on the page. What we'll do to start off with is we'll create a variable, and we'll use getElementById to store the information. So I'm going to create a variable. I'm going to make it equal to document.getElementById, and then in my parentheses inside of quotes I'm going to put the name of the ID that I want to get. So currently we're just setting the wrapper to be referred to as a variable called myWrapper. Now that I have the variable, I can use it, and I can just call setAttribute. So I'll put the name of my new variable, and I'll pass on the setAttribute method, and then in parentheses inside of single quotes I'm going to pass on the attribute and value that I want to change. So we'll just do something like set the align value to center. Notice how both the attribute and the value appear inside of quotes. If we save our page and go into our browser and refresh, you can now see that all the text is center aligned. And if I look into the developer tools, you can see that on my div with an ID of wrapper, I now have an attribute called align, which is set to center. You can also add inline styles using the same sort of technique. Instead of having align, I would go ahead and put style, and then instead of having center, I would put the property and value that I want to control. So here we'll use font weight of bold. I'm going to go ahead and save this, and notice again attribute, and then this is the value, even though in this particular value we're passing on a property and another value. If we save the page and refresh in the browser, you can now see that all my text changes to bold. And if we look in the div, we have the ID of wrapper and we have the style of font weight bold. So you can see that it's very easy just to change the attributes of an element that you have a handle to. The next thing that you might be interested in doing is changing the contents of an element. So let's say that you have an H1 that you want to change, or you have a paragraph that you want to change. Well, here you have a couple of different options. The simplest option is a method called inner HTML. You can use that on any element that you have. It allows you to either read or change the entire contents of the element. So let's go ahead and give this anchor tag here an ID. We'll just give it an ID of more flavors. Currently, the anchor tag contains the word flavors. But what we're going to do is we're going to go into our JavaScript and we're going to change what is currently there. Okay, I'm going to use the name of my ID, more flavors, and I'm going to make it equal to document.getElementById, and then we're going to pass on the name of the ID that we want to make a modification to. And here we'll just run the console to start off with, so I'll run console.log, and we're just going to go ahead and query moreflavors.innerHTML. So if we save the page and we go look at it in the browser, if we go to our console, you can see that it's giving me back flavors. And that is actually what this A tag contains. It contains the word flavors. So in order to actually change the value of the href attribute, we can easily do this by using our friend getElementById. I'll go ahead and use the document.getElementById. I'm going to pass on more flavors, and we'll just go ahead and pass on href and set it equal to whatever we want the new href value to be. So if we save this and we go refresh in our browser, you can now see that my link has a href value of x, y, z. Utilizing this technique, I am able to get a specific element, and then I can pass on a specific attribute and the new value that I want to change.